in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Esther chapter 2 again today, just to kind of review some of the big things that we've been talking about. We're developing a view of King Xerxes, who is also Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus is your Hebrew name. Xerxes is your Greek name, both versions of a Persian name, which I cannot pronounce for you. What are we learning about the king so far? What's your character sketch, your thumbnail of King Xerxes, King Ahasuerus so far? How do you feel about this guy?
He's a party guy.
He's a party guy. He is definitely a party guy, and that will continue today for sure, yeah?
Big ego.
Big ego, yeah, definitely a big ego. What else we got with Xerxes? Yes? Doesn't know the laws. He forgets his own laws, and then he regrets his own laws. Yeah, he's not real sharp there. And this guy's like the strongest, the most powerful political figure in the world at the time. And not super sharp. Spoiled, definitely spoiled, no question about that. Spoiled. Yeah, all these things. We're invited to think carefully, I think, when the Bible talks about Pharaoh or Caesar or Nebuchadnezzar or Xerxes or whoever, Belshazzar. We're invited to scrutinize this in a few levels. One thing, it helps us to evaluate leaders in our world today, but the other thing, it helps to evaluate our own hearts. What are we like? And maybe there's a little bit more Xerxes in us than what we like sometimes. And so there's an opportunity for introspection here. We wouldn't want our assessment of Xerxes to end with us shaking our head at Xerxes, and that's the end of the story, but with us thinking critically about the world and about our own lives. So Xerxes not looking well. He's going to look worse by the end of the day. Just as a spoiler alert, our view of Xerxes is going to diminish even further after we see what he does here in this chapter. Xerxes has gotten angry a few times, especially when his what he wants doesn't happen, or when he is humiliated. He wants to be honored and he gets shamed instead. And I think it raises some questions, at least for me. When I'm angry, why am I angry? There's good anger, there's bad anger, there's muddled anger. And sometimes I'm angry not because I'm right and because it's like a cause of justice or something, but I'm angry because I didn't get my way or because I looked bad. And certainly so far the king has been angry because he didn't get his way and he looked bad. And he's drunk, and that doesn't go across well. In general, drunkenness in the Bible is not a good thing at all. So the king has that problem too. The other thing, the king's decision-making processes. This guy is the most powerful man in the world, and he can't make a decision. Have you noticed this so far? He's always calling somebody in to help him make his decisions, to help him figure stuff out. And then his criteria for a good decision is, sounds good to me. Right? It's pleasing to me. And so we've got this, judges in person here. The book of Judges, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And that's really what Xerxes does here. If it's suggested to him and it seems pleasing to him, let's do it. And that's the beginning of chapter 2. The beginning of chapter 2, he begins to remember Vashti. And usually when the word remember is used in that way in the Bible, it's going to be in a positive sense. The Lord remembers so-and-so and alleviates their hardship. And so you get the idea he's having some regret about what he's done to Vashti. But according to Esther and Daniel, once a Persian king makes a decree, it can't be undone. And so he's having this second thoughts kind of pity party. And so his advisors rush into the scene. We've got to cheer up the king. And our plan is, King, let's send commissioners out through the whole empire, from the Indus to the Nile, and let's find the most beautiful young ladies unmarried and bring them into you, and you pick the one you like the best, and she can be your queen. And he says, that's a great idea, How could he turn that down? And all of a sudden, he's bright and cheery again. And so we have the shallowness of Ahasuerus here. He's a shallow guy. He was starting to actually have some noble emotion here, feeling bad for this queen that he deposed just for not, appearing before his drunken mob of men at their feast. And now all of a sudden, ooh, all the beautiful women in the empire. Sounds great to me. And we hum right along. At least that's the way our narrator tells the story. So let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. That sets us up. Let's go back again, verses 5 through 7, and somebody will read that. Chapter 2, Deborah, Esther 2, verses 5 through 7. We're going to go back to our introduction of Mordecai and Esther. Okay, so Tiffany would tell us this is foreshadowing, right? The girl that pleases the king. We find out Esther is lovely. So just real quick here, because we unpacked this last week, but the important things from this passage for our rest of the conversation is that Mordecai is a Jew. He's actually the tribe of Benjamin, but at this point they're all lumped together as Jews because he has come, his family has come from the region of Judah. Mordecai, if he's alive in the reign of Ahasuerus, Xerxes, would not have been alive in the days of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, but probably the reference here is to Kish, his great-grandfather, who was among those who came over in the days of Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar does multiple rounds of exiling people from Judah to Babylon, and this particular round was noted for exiling the nobility, the best and the brightest, if you will. And so Mordecai is probably of noble stock, but he's in exile, and so he's a son of exile, really. And Esther is therefore a daughter of exile. Their family line comes back from this group that's been hauled from home. And Esther is not only in exile, she is also an orphan who has been taken in by her uncle. So exile, orphan, life has not gone the way they would have drawn it up, and they're not where they are because of their own choice. And so here we have these people in Esther, in Mordecai, who have been taken away from their home, and now we're going to have more taking away happening with all these women who are gathered to satisfy the king's desires from the opening of the chapter. Any other questions about Esther and Mordecai right now? We'll get to more later on both of them.
So this would have been the same group of the exile that like Daniel and his friends would have been?
Well, it's unclear to me. So I think, so Liz is asking whether or not Mordecai's ancestors came over in the same round of exile as Daniel and his friends. I think that Daniel may have been like 605, 602. So Nebuchadnezzar wins a battle in 605, which effectively means Babylon has whipped Assyria and Egypt into submission. And at that point, then they swoop down and grab the first round out of Judah. And then there may have been so that's 605. To my memory, there may have been a 602, 601 round. This is a 597 round. And the final round was 587, 586. And again, we're off by a year or so sometimes on our guesses on this because the history from that period is the second year of so-and-so, the 17th year of so-and-so, that kind of thing. And when do you count your year as beginning and ending? Do you count the calendar year? You know, that sort of thing. So this is not the first round. So Nebuchadnezzar has been king of the world for 8 years by the time he grabs Jehoiakim and the nobles who come with him. So not round number one. Whether or not Daniel was in that round, I can't say for certain. But if I remember correctly from Daniel, which was 5 years ago now, I think that Daniel was thought to have possibly in the earlier round.
So, but you said this is the round of the nobility?
This is a round in which nobility was known to be hauled off. So one of the purposes, there's a couple purposes there, in getting as detailed as the author gets about Mordecai's pedigree. One is possibly to show that he is from this round of nobility hauled away, but also to show he's from the line of Benjamin. He's related to Saul, at least in the broad sense, because King Saul is from the tribe of Benjamin, and King Saul had a father named Kish. Can't be the same Kish historically, but family names get reused again. So we want to establish that he's a Jew in that round of exile and a relative of Saul, and all those are going to be important later on. Haman is an Agagite, and the Agagites and Saul had some issues back in Saul's day, and so that's one reason we're pointing out that Mordecai is from that line.
So Daniel would have gotten all the way before the nobility?
Well, not necessarily before the nobility, before this cluster of nobility. We're just the characterization of those who were hauled away during the time of Jehoiakim is that a lot of these were high status people, you know, so they're not hauling. Who wants to import the poor, the uneducated, the downtrodden, the oppressed to your empire? You want to bring in the educated, the skilled, people you can make to work for you and do stuff for you. I'm not trying to discriminate there. I'm just talking from this perspective of an ancient, dictator. What do you want to do? And so, that quite possibly there's a whisper here that he's from noble stock, which would explain how he gets a job at the king's gate, later on. And he's probably more than just a gatekeeper, like the guy who unlocks the gate. I was telling Liz one of the sources I came across yesterday said that at the gate may just be an official who worked in the building closest to the gate, like a whole government complex. If you've been in Indianapolis, there's the State House, and there's all these buildings around it. And so it may be at the gate means he was, at that first main administrative building inside the gate. I don't know for sure, possible. So all of this is speculation, but collectively it probably means something. Any other questions about their background? All right, well, let's move forward then. Verses, let's see, we read those. Verses 8 and 9. Chapter 2, Steve has it, verses 8 and 9.
When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many girls were brought to the citadel of Susa and put in the care of Haggai. Esther was also taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Haggai, who had charge of the harem. The girl pleased him and won his favor. Immediately he provided her with beauty treatments and special food, and he assigned her 7 maids selected from the king's palace and moved her and her maids into the best place in the harem.
There we go. Okay, so the king's order and edict, literally the king's word and law. The king's word and law is a big deal in Esther, for that matter, Daniel, and his law is binding. And so the king's order and edict, we're implying here that the plan, the scheme of verses 2, 3, and 4 has become the law, the word of the king, by verse 8. And so you've had these emissaries go out throughout the land to gather, to take these women. So many girls, girl here just is young, unmarried woman, no specificity about age. This term at this point does not necessitate that they are virgins, although that term is used later in the same paragraph. So that's implied here. Unmarried women, the king is not going to have someone who already belonged to somebody else. They're going to be, virgins. So many girls, and they were gathered, they were brought in. The word for being brought or being gathered is not necessarily sinister, although it can easily be used for Joseph's grain in the book of Genesis. So gather some virgins, gather some grain, bring them all in. But it's also used for the people of God gathering for worship or gathering for battle. So the word is not necessarily sinister, but they are gathered. They're not signing up here. This is not like word goes out and you sign up at your local library to volunteer for the beauty contest to go to see the king here. This is they're being gathered, and we're invited to imagine some less than desirable methodology in gathering these women. We're imagining that this is not volitional on their part. They're not saying, oh yeah, I really want to go do that. And we'll see why this isn't a super desirable thing actually in a little bit. So they're being gathered, and later on Esther was also taken. So the words are passive here. They're not, she's like, yes, here I want to go. It's being gathered, being taken, just like in the previous paragraph, Esther's ancestors, Mordecai's ancestors were taken in exile. It wasn't like, oh yeah, let's go to Babylon, let's leave home. So you've got this idea that these women, much as the Jews in general, have been taken against their will. They're going to probably not see their families again. And so not a super desirable thing. Questions at that point? So Haggai is literally, according to the Hebrew text, in charge of the women. I just love that title, as I told you last week. What a great title. What's your role in the cabinet there? I'm the guy in charge of the women. By implication, the house of the women, which is the phrase used later, so we're talking about the harem here. This already existed. We're not inventing a harem for King Xerxes right now. He has already had a collection of women at his disposal, if that's the right word for it, all the way along. So he already has a man in charge of this, who apparently is already used to preparing women to go in and be with the king. And so Haggai is the guy in charge. Esther is also taken and trusted to his care. And what does Esther do in verse 9?
She won the favor of Haggai.
Yeah, she won his favor. She pleased him and won his favor. A few things here that are interesting. One is that word for favor is our Hebrew word hesed, which most often in the Old Testament is about God's unfailing love or God's loving kindness, God's loyal love. It's translated different ways, but usually when we think of hesed in the Old Testament, we think about this character trait of God his loyal love. He's faithful to his promises. He's kind as a result. He's working for our best. And yet the word can also be used of people, usually a superior to an inferior. They showed kindness to you. The person in charge showed you kindness, showed you favor. In this case, though, she wins or earns or gains his favor. So something about her way of being has impressed Haggai, who has dealt with all kinds of women over the years in his line of work, if that's the right word for it. And so he is pleased with her in some way, and she's earned his favor. This invites us to think about other Old Testament characters who were far from home in pagan courts and managed to gain favor. And some of those are on the board behind me. I guess I should have not put them there so you could have guessed what they are. But we think about last week for VBS. VBS was all about who last week? Joseph. Who all does Joseph find favor in the eyes of in his story? Potiphar. So he becomes a slave. He serves Potiphar. Potiphar likes him, gives him authority over his household. Who else does he gain favor in the eyes of? Pharaoh. And in between Potiphar and Pharaoh, who else does he gain favor in the eyes of? The jailer, the guy, the warden in charge of the prison where he is. And that repeatedly happens. And of course, they're having it happen 3 times. The book of Genesis is emphasizing to us just how much the Lord really is with Joseph and giving him favor. Everybody he ends up serving under really likes the guy and promotes him. We also have Daniel. Lots of examples really for Daniel and Daniel's friend, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, throughout the book of Daniel, especially the first half, where they gain favor in the eyes of some official or some king. Chapter 1, and I have the references here, we won't read them all in the interest of time, but chapter 1, Daniel and his friends get favor in the eyes of this official who's in charge of them when they want to try out the different food than what the king serves, and they win favor in the eyes of that official. And then by the end of the chapter, they win favor in the eyes of the king. You people are wiser and stronger than anybody else, so I'm going to sign you up for great things. And then basically every time Daniel interprets a dream, or every time Daniel or his friends survive something that should have been a fatal, they get promoted. So lion's den, promotion. Fiery furnace, promotion. Interpret a dream for the king, promotion. And so there's a continual finding favor there. And then also Nehemiah. So Nehemiah is the generation after Esther, and Nehemiah is working under King Artaxerxes, who is the son of this guy, Xerxes Ahasuerus. And basically Nehemiah asks something outlandish. Can I go back home and take some people with me back home so we can rebuild our house of worship? And the king says yes. And so this is understood by us as being the Lord's favor upon Nehemiah. So you've actually got a rich tradition throughout the Old Testament, I may be forgetting others, of outsiders, Jewish. It's out of order to call Joseph Jewish. He's house of Israel, but the term Jew doesn't come up until exile time. But anyway, you have people from the Holy Land. You have people from the line of Abraham not living at home anymore, off serving under pagan kings and gaining favor. And Esther is in line with those folks. Questions or comments about that? Yes, Bill.
Don't you think all those individuals, their characteristics were that they were intelligent, that they were also humble, and presented themselves with some assurance?
Yeah. Bill was asking about the character traits of these folks who end up gaining favor. That they were also, humble folks. Joseph, I would say, becomes humble. When he's sharing his dreams with the brothers. Guess this dream I had, guys. You guys were bowing down to me. Okay, he was struggling with the humility thing at that point. But definitely later on, certainly humble, honest is descriptive of him. And then given insight by God. That's true especially of Joseph and Daniel both, where we have it established for us that the way they're able to have this discernment as far as the meaning of dreams and as far as decision making is a gift from God. So that's you're talking, yes, Nehemiah for sure. Absolutely. Nehemiah it's the prayer that sets up the favor, right? Nehemiah. So you have God giving favor to each one of these, and you have them being people of integrity and the kind of character. So this is a beauty contest is too small of a term here because we think a beauty contest is something desirable. You get to stay in a nice hotel and you get a trophy or whatever else. But this is definitely speaking to Esther's character beyond her appearance. Something about her. You know, this is garden variety, dime a dozen work for Haggai, right? Another beautiful woman to get ready for a night with the king, but something about her gains favor. And in our text here later on, she'll gain favor not just with Haggai, but with everybody. I don't know, whoever checks you in at the palace and whoever runs the elevator, I don't know. But everybody else who's there, she gains favor, and then, of course, in the eyes of the king. So there's something about this woman that is captivating. And the fact that the word hesed is used here, you know, one of the things that we have in Esther is that God's names do not show up. None of the names for God show up in the book of Esther. But by dropping this word, it's as if the narrator is saying, I want you to know that God is at work behind this, even though I haven't said as much in the passage so far. Yes, Liz?
Well, and you and I have been talking about this, like, the fact that, Esther, of course, is beautiful with all these other beautiful women. But, if you're in a room where everyone is gorgeous, it's very hard to distinguish yourself.
That's right.
We talked about that in terms of Xerxes later, but also here with Haggai, like, you're talking about her character, like, there must have really been something about her, that really set her apart for him to
Yeah.
have, be so pleased with her in the course of Xerxes, because, she's one of many in here
Right.
that are just gorgeous.
There have to be a variety of things that set Esther apart from, as you're saying, a room of people that are all gorgeous. And we're invited to think of hundreds of women here involved in this process. Plus, who knows how many others are already in this harem at the time. But, yeah, for sure. Other comments or questions about the favor that Esther gets? Specifically, how does this play out? She gains favor in the eyes of Haggai. So what does he arrange for her? A few benefits, a few perks here in verse 9. Best place to stay. I don't know what that is. What's the worst place in the harem to stay? I mean, I'm assuming that as far as outward luxury, this is a nice place. You get good food, good clothing, it's not air conditioned, but whatever they did instead of air conditioning. I mean, it's a nice place to live, but it's a captive place. Somebody else said.
Beauty treatment.
Yeah, immediate beauty treatment. So it's like she gets, first in line type of thing. So they're all there for these beauty treatments, which was part of the idea of the king's advisors. We're going to get the most beautiful women in the world. We're going to bring them here to your harem. We're going to make them even more beautiful, and then you get to pick the one you like. So this is all part of, gratifying the king's hormones here. But there's some immediacy as part of the favor, yes. 7 attendants, yeah. So 7 is always a good number in the Bible, right? It means the whole shebang. She got 7 attendants. Yeah. Yeah, a good place she has to live. She's got a staff. I don't know what I would do with this. I told you before, Tiffany and I watch Rick Steves every now and again, and he was talking about some place where the king's attendants would dress him. I don't want you dressing me. You go in the hall and make my breakfast or something. Why are we doing all this stuff? But apparently they have people to do everything here. So she has 7 maids to help the process, I guess. Other comments or impressions about Esther's special treatment? Yeah, how do the other women feel about Esther? Because we know how people felt about Joseph, and we know how people felt about Daniel, and we know how people felt about Nehemiah, and jealousy plays a role in each of those stories. And so it would not be surprising if that's involved here. It is only allowed, so much in this passage is allowed for our imagination, we just don't know. But in general, that doesn't go over well. Because this is a fierce competition that these women, and we'll talk more about that in a little. Yeah. A house of women who've been brought here against their will to compete for the one position of queen, or else be relegated to the house of concubines, and maybe never be called upon again. Luxurious slavery, is really the pressure here. Either you win the king's favor, or you may be forgotten forever, and no children, right? Unless you're going in regularly to the king, you're not going to have any hope of children, and you're far from home and family, and so it's kind of a high-class captivity situation, and maybe it's not as great as it's cracked up to be. That's the pressure. Right. Right. The parents, the men to whom these women were promised back home, all of that. Yes. So Liz is asking a question. How do these people feel about the king rounding up all these women? Something else I came across in my reading yesterday, the day before, is that the same thing was actually happening in the Persian Empire for young men from peoples they had conquered, from Assyria, from Babylon. Young men were gathered and castrated to become eunuchs in service to the king. So, you're taking these young, viable men and women both out of society around the empire, and instead of contributing to life, family, labor, society, all these places, we're going to bring them in and basically condemn them to servitude to the king forever and ever, because the king wants more. Not because the king needs more, because the king wants more. And so this is par for the course in the ancient Persian world, is my understanding, both ways. So, you can just imagine the high school crush, or whatever they called them in those days. They didn't have high school, I guess. But then it's whisked away off to the palace, never to be seen again. So this is a heartbreaking thing. You can imagine all the goodbyes. So if you endeavor to do an actually historically accurate movie about Esther, then you can keep that in there and the heartbreaking goodbyes. But don't do it like the other movies about Esther, because they've kind of blown it so far. Other questions or comments? Okay, verses 10 and 11. Let's read a bit more about what had not yet happened. Verses 10 and 11. And Sandy, thank you.
Esther did not reveal her nationality and family background, because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked back and forth in the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her.
Okay, thank you. So we find out actually a little bit later on that Mordecai is at the gate and has conversations with royal officials. And as I said a moment ago, that might just mean he works at the building closest to the gate. He's among the officials, not necessarily the gatekeeper. We haven't found that out yet, though, in the story. But he's pacing in the courtyard, or near the courtyard of the harem, literally the yard of the women. You got a house of women and a yard of women. That's where you keep it's like prison. You got the building where you keep them and the yard where they can roam around for recreation time. So here he is, hanging out as close as he can get, because he already works in the palace complex there. And he's trying to get word about Esther. So you get the idea he really cares about her. And how does word come? And basically the answer is the grapevine works well in ancient Persia, just like it does today. So Mordecai knows people in the palace who know people in the palace. And as one of the scholars said, people in the know love to let you know they're in the know. So these servants are probably delighting and saying, well, I can't say this, but let me tell you what's going on anyway. So he's got some kind of pipeline of intelligence coming in. You can imagine Hogan's Heroes or something, a pipeline of intelligence, because Xerxes very much fits with the Colonel Klink type of thing. The drunkenness and the crazy for women and the not super bright and the always needing it. I think he could work with that. Anyway, the point is Mordecai has his ways of getting news. But the more important line is verse 10. What has Esther not done? What has Esther not done? Yeah, not revealed that she is Jewish, because why? Yeah, Mordecai said, don't tell them about your background, which raises several questions. Obviously, Mordecai, as a Jew, has managed to rise to pretty good prominence in the empire here. He's a royal official of some kind. And before Mordecai, we have people like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. We know from history that we have people from other places who rise to positions of authority within these ancient empires. So apparently, being Jewish has not been an immediate disqualifier for him. Yet, as we'll find later in the story, anti-Semitism, as we would say, is alive and well in ancient Persia. And so it's going to be a problem when Haman finds out some things. And then, of course, there's some eagerness in the empire to jump on that. But also maybe it's not just a matter of revealing the Judaism, but maybe also revealing the connections to Mordecai. Don't tell him that you're Jewish, but don't tell him you're related to me. Maybe part of it as well, since he already works in the king's compound there, and since he apparently already has friends and enemies. We'll find that out a little bit later. So don't disclose who you are quite yet, as if it would matter to the king. The king doesn't care where you're from. He cares whether you please him or not, and that's it. but keep it on the down low who you are and where you're from. So that sets up kind of the discovery later on of who Esther is, and that allows for the ignorance of the king to go along with Haman's suggestion a bit later. He's ignorant of his own queen's nationality. How well do you know your wife? Is one of the questions here. Comments, questions about the hiding of her identity. All right, well, let's talk about the interview process, as it were, here. Let's do verses 12 through 14. Who wants this? 12 through 14 of chapter 2. Bill, thank you.
Before a girl's turn came to go into university, she had a complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women. 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem to the care of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name.
Okay, so a girl's turn came. One of the sources says, I think one of our Greek historians tells us that Persian men with multiple wives in this era, that their wives would take turns who spent the night with him. There was an order to it. And so this is taking turns. We got all these women lined up, and so it's time for you to go into the king. Her turn to go spend the night with him. And as I said before, they're not just like watching a movie or something. So her turn to go in and have an intimate encounter with the king. To go into is a sexual euphemism, lots of places in the Old Testament. Now, there's a lot more going and coming than that in the Old Testament. So every time you see the word go in the Old Testament, does not mean that there's some kind of erotic encounter happening. But in this case, it's loaded. She's going in for a sexual encounter with the king. And that word for go is used again here repeatedly throughout each of our verses in this little section. Before a girl came to go in, she had to complete her beauty treatments. And we have, 12 months total here, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfume and cosmetics. This is probably an example of our storyteller having a fun time exaggerating. As I said at the beginning of our study, I'm of the opinion this is one of those based on a true story things, kind of like those movies that we would watch that are, there's a sequence of events that happen, but they're having fun telling the story in a way that kind of highlights some things. And one of the things our author is doing repeatedly is exaggerating the excesses of the king. He's an over-the-top king who does stuff over the top. So 12 months of beauty treatments, I mean, I don't know what you can do in a year of beauty treatments, but I think there's kind of a certain threshold that once you hit that, you probably can't go beyond that. But that's just my understanding. And then the scholars go all over the place speculating on exactly how this works. Were there fragrances being burned, lotions being rubbed on, baths being soaked in? I don't totally know. But you're trying to make the beautiful more beautiful with the maximum possible treatment available, and they're getting the full treatment before they go into the king. Questions or comments about that? When she goes into the king, verse 13, she can take anything she wanted to take with her. And like I said, this is not like a great movie she rented at Blockbuster, or this is not like a favorite teddy bear. She's not taking those kind of things. These are like accessories to make the encounter with the king better. When you're driving down the highway, you get off the interstate at the exit, you've got like the hotels and the restaurants and the truck stops. And then you got like that shady looking place behind that with the creepy name that you never go to. Like that's where you would get the things you want to take with her to go see the king. That's the kind of thing we're talking about here. So she's going to try to set herself apart, right? Because she wants to be distinguished. You got all these women night after night after night, and you've got to go in there and make your impression on him. And he's got to remember you by name, because after your evening with the king the next morning, you go to the other part of the house of women with Shazgar in charge, and you're part of the concubines forever, and you will stay there unless the king remembers you and calls you by name. So the pressure for each of these women to perform in their night with the king and to be memorable to the point where he's going to remember you and call on you again. I mean, even though he's going to select a queen from among us, he's still going to dig deep into the concubines every now and again when he is just bored, I guess. And so there's a chance you get called on again, but if you don't distinguish yourself, you don't get called again. So that's what's going on here with this competition. They've got to try to impress the king significantly. Questions or comments about that process? Yes, Norm?
Maybe I missed it, but were all the prospective ladies
Yes.
informed of this is the performance you're working?
Yeah, they knew what they had to do here. I mean, they knew what they were being prepped for and coached for. I was talking to Liz, there's a movie with Kevin James and Will Smith in it. And what's the name of it? Hitch, yeah. And so Kevin James, who is Kevin James, right, this chubby, lovable guy, but not particularly attractive, right? And he is our hero in the story, and he's trying to get a date with this beautiful woman who's like a celebrity and everything else, and he's like one of her legal or financial advisors. And so bring in Will Smith to try to advise him and how he's going to become. So it's a funny movie. But anyway, he knows what he's vying for and what he's trying to be prepared for. And so there's some of that in this. They understand that they are in a sexual competition, and they have one night to impress the king over against all these hundreds of others, and that if they don't make an impression, they will never get called back again. And they'll just be kind of confined to the other part of the harem, and that's all they get, you know. So, yeah, they know what they're vying for, and there is apparently some advising or some coaching going on, because we find that in the portion with Esther in the next couple of verses. Any other questions about that? This really shows us what a creep the king is. You know, I mean, this is not your typical dating process. This is not your typical interview process. This is just the king who is all hormones and taste buds, and here he goes again, doing what he does. So, this is actually one of the "you asked for it" questions that I got this summer was, tell us the children's stories in the Bible that aren't really children's stories. And I'm going to get to a series on those at some point, but this would be one of the children's stories that's not actually a children's story, because this is, you know, like I said, this is the stuff that belongs in the building behind the truck stop. So, verses 15 and 16, how did Esther handle this situation? 15 and 16. Who would like that? All right, Liz, thank you.
Esther was the daughter of Abihail, who was Mordecai's uncle. Mordecai was adopted and her son Esther. When it was Esther's turn to go to the king, she accepted the advice of Hagar, the eunuch in charge of the harem. She asked for nothing except what he suggested. When she was admired by everyone who saw her. Esther was taken to the royal palace and early winter of the 7th year of Esther.
Okay, 7th year of his reign. Why the gap? In the first year, when he got angry at Vashti, it was the 3rd year. Now we're in the 7th year. Why the reason for the gap? Well, quite possibly the war that Xerxes was off fighting against the Greeks in the intervening years. That would actually fit around this historically. So all that is in the favor of we're actually dealing with a real sequence of events here in some sense. But anyway, 7th year of his reign. Esther's turn. We find out a little bit more about Esther's bio here. I don't know anything else about Abihail, her father, but we find out that extra detail here. It's her turn to go to the king for this encounter. And what does Esther do when she goes in to see the king? Verse 15.
He asked the guy who's in charge of the
Right.
harem,
Right.
the eunuch, guy or however you pronounce it,
Yeah.
the king's eunuch, asked him what she should take.
Yes, so Haggai has been sending women in for encounters with the king for a long time now, and you get the idea he's been doing that since before this recent scheme. So even in the days of Vashti, Xerxes was maintaining a harem and was having women sent to him at his beck and call, and Haggai's role had been to get them ready. So Haggai knows something about the king's taste. This is kind of a disgusting line of thinking, but he is able to prep her, and so she takes nothing more than what Haggai recommends that she takes. So this contrasts with the women can take anything they want in there. One of the few liberties that they actually have, you can make choices what you want to take with you to go in and help please the king. And Esther avails herself of none of the extra accessories, I guess, other than what Haggai advises. So this maybe is there a few different ways. Her prudence, her respectful attitude, her deference, her simplicity as contrasted with the king's extravagance, everything he does over the top. She's simple. Maybe also something about the purity of her beauty. She doesn't require all the other gimmicks that she might take with her. Something, maybe all those things are being communicated here about Esther's going into the king, but she doesn't do anything flashy out of the ordinary to catch his attention, is part of the message here. And what happens as a result of this in the back half, verse 15? The last part of verse 15. Yeah, she wins the favor, literally, wins the favor of all those who saw her. And so you're getting the idea there's this whole team of people responsible to get her from the building where the women are to the building where the king is, or the part of the building where the king is. So a lot of people are involved, and they're all charmed by her. She has some kind of winsomeness about her personality or her way of doing things. Her choice here is seen as favorable by the narrator and by those who encountered her. And she is taken, again, the verb is passive. She's taken to King Xerxes. We have no idea how willing or unwilling Esther is to participate in this whole process, but the king said so here she goes, and she's taken in the 7th year of his reign. Questions, comments? Yes, Bill.
You have to wonder by this, if you knew what pleased the king, that the king didn't brag about things on the morning after.
Yeah.
And so he gathered information, knowing what the king had said.
Yeah.
And then utilized those things to suggest to Esther what to do.
Yeah. Haggai, the king talks about his escapades, right? And so Haggai has known what he talks about. And so Haggai has been able to coach Esther, and she just takes his advice at that point and goes on in. Yeah, it's, there's so much left for the imagination in this passage. And then we're like, ooh, my imagination shouldn't go there. And that's kind of the whole way that this thing is conveyed here. So yeah, she has followed the advice of wise counsel, if that's the right term for it. Verses 17 and 18. All right, Jeff.
And the king loved Esther above all women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the world, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast with all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast. And he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king.
Okay, so the king, your text says love. I think the NIV understandably translates the word love as attracted there. We're getting the idea that this is not like a deep and abiding love that you really have, this is not a substantive love here. Xerxes is not that deep. he operates at the surface. And so he enjoyed his experience with Esther more than any others. There may be something here, though, because she's gained the favor of Haggai and gained the favor of everybody else, that she in some sense is winsome in more ways. There may be more than just skin-deep attraction here, but we're not that impressed with the character of the king here. But she wins the contest. She's the winner. She is the one who has been selected out of all these beautiful women to be queen instead of Vashti. And so she is given, what all is she given there? Verses 17 and 18. A banquet and a crown. Yeah, the king is very liberal. He liberal in terms of his distributing of fancy things when he wants to have a party. We already saw his royal liberality, as my translation says, back in the opening chapter with the lengthy feast to his own honor, which went very well from his standpoint until his wife says, forget that, I'm not coming to your feast, So he is extravagant when he wants to celebrate himself or someone special to him. So she gets the crown, she gets the title of queen instead of Vashti, and she gets a great banquet, the banquet of Esther. And really the Jewish people have continued to do this through the years. They have the Feast of Purim, which remembers the story of Esther. And so eating in Esther's honor continues to this day, and as I already have teased, we will try to replicate the Feast of Purim whenever we finish our journey through Esther sometime in late 2028. He proclaimed a holiday or a release, probably a release of certain tax burdens. When the king's happy, waive some taxes, no big deal. When the king needs some money, a new tribute is imposed, so he just kind of does this whenever he wants to. So, hey, they get some relief from whatever they've been having to pay. The whole empire benefits sort of from Esther's success, although of course all those who are related to all the women who didn't win the contest are not exactly going to be thrilled about this celebration, and the women who are stuck. Yes.
Treatment of women to King Henry VIII.
Yes.
Who beheaded, imprisoned, and did away with his wives.
Yes.
So they didn't produce sons.
Right. So Norm is saying that Xerxes here, Ahasuerus here, reminds him of King Henry VIII. You could probably find a great number of monarchs in world history, from as long as there have been kings up to the present day, at home and abroad, powerful political people who treat women as objects and nothing more than sources of pleasure and political objects to be used or not used for their own glory. The objectification of women is not a brand new invention, and Ahasuerus was very skilled at it and had built an entire industry in his palace compound that was geared toward getting beautiful women more beautiful to please him.
But he just supplanted Vashti.
Right.
He didn't dump her.
Yeah, Vashti has not been executed, and she will. If we talked before, but in the secular histories it's Amystress, in the biblical history it's Vashti. Is it the same person or not? I can't say for sure. It's quite possible that the king maintained multiple queens, because that would fit the character description we've read here. But if Vashti is in fact Amystress, Amystress all of a sudden disappears from the history during Xerxes' reign, which would fit with a falling out like we have here, and then reappears during the reign of Artaxerxes I, the king during the days of Nehemiah, and Artaxerxes is her son. So she becomes the queen mother, and she's a violent woman. She has people crucified, buried alive, beheaded. I mean, she does all kinds of stuff. And so it's quite possible that if Vashti is in fact the historical Amystress, that she has only made a temporary vanishing from power until her husband, former husband or whatever, is dead, and then she'll come roaring back as queen mother. And boy, will she come roaring if Herodotus is spot on there. So don't mess with the king's mama is the lesson from Amystress. All right, what are your impressions about this before we go into the next section, which would probably be better to wait for next week at this point? Impressions about these 18 verses we've looked at here in chapter 2.
A whole lot has changed since then.
Not a whole lot has changed since then, right? Nothing new under the sun, says Ecclesiastes, for sure. What'd you say? The king is still a creep. He is a creep, and that's one of the things being highlighted here. In the story of Esther, the gloss of this is, hey, the Lord raised somebody up to save the Jews from persecution. And that's true. But the process that she goes through, this is not really a flattering process. Now, she ends up becoming queen and getting a banquet, but you still get the sense later on in Esther, really from before, right? Vashti had to be summoned. Even though she's the queen, she had to be summoned to appear before the king. And Esther has this conundrum later on. Can I go to the king unsummoned, or will I get executed for it? So she's still, this isn't like the king and queen happily making decisions together. She is still a subordinate party, not as tucked away as the concubines are. Your concubines are like your junior varsity wives, and then she's like the varsity. But she's still called upon when she is summoned, and she's still really an object, a toy in the hands of the king, and not a very pleasant reality for her. And I can't help but think about the loneliness of these other women who are now in the concubine forever, maybe to never be summoned again. And they probably eat well, and they probably got a nicer pillow in Susa than they did back home, wherever they came from, but never see mom and dad again, never have a family of their own. I mean, unless the king really, has some interaction with them. It's just not a great deal, not a great deal.
Well, the old saying is true: power corrupts.
Yeah, I was thinking about that saying in preparation for this. The saying is that, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But I actually think it might be a better saying to say that power simply exposes your corruption. This is already a corrupt dude, and then he gets the most power in the world, and you get to see him for all he is. So a lot of our corruption is hidden because we're not on TV every day, and the news media is not following us around, and no one's tweeting about us or voting against us, this sort of thing. But you get to these kinds of places, and you will be shown for who you are, one way or the other. And in the case of Joseph and Daniel and some of these others, they get power, and all of a sudden it's not corruption, it's integrity. So really, I think, and no disrespect to it, I mean, the phrase is the phrase, but I think that phrase is just a little bit inverted. It's actually, your absolute power will show you for who you are. And either you're a person of integrity who cares about the living God and this sort of thing. You fear God, you fear people when you actually do the right thing. Or you're in it for you. And Xerxes is in it for Xerxes. There is no question about that. He's in it for one guy and one guy only. And not a very good way of leading. Yes?
Well, I was also thinking too, and this kind of, you see this in our world today too, like the more money you have, the more power you have, all this, the more about yourself you are.
Yeah.
It never really satisfies. You always need more and more. You need new, you need bigger, you need brighter. And you can really see that in him too. Like he's this spoiled king that is just does whatever he wants all the time and just continues to need more and more and more of everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just probably never fully satisfied.
The more you have, the more you want. I mean, you think about the teachings of Jesus and really the New Testament in general, the Scripture in general. Be content with what you have, and don't accumulate for yourselves large amounts of treasure on earth. A man's life does not consist of the abundance of his possessions. This line of teaching is in the Scripture because if you begin to find your identity, your worth, your meaning, your excitement in life in your quantity of possessions, money, exotic experiences, whatever else it is, you've always got to top it. You always need something more to make it a little bit better. And this is the way that almost all commercial advertising works. Hey, it's great you have this, but you really need this other thing, and this other thing, and this other thing. And if my satisfaction is in my stuff, my experiences, my whatever, I can never have enough. I have to keep getting more and more and more. So be content with what you have, Hebrews says, because God is always with you. He'll never leave you. But you can, delight yourself in the Lord, the psalmist says, and he'll give you the desires of your heart. Not delight yourself in the Lord, and therefore you get all this wealth and treasure and pleasure and whatever, but delight yourself in the Lord, and he himself will satisfy the desires of your hearts, regardless of how much other stuff that you have. And I think it's especially instructive for us to consider, we live like kings, really. Most of us live like kings. And so analyzing our own habits of consumption, of spending, of pleasure, of whatever else, and what is that doing in our hearts? That's the real question. Where your treasure is, Jesus says, your heart will be also. And so Xerxes, from the start here, has been about more food, more drink, more women, more whatever else he can get. And he needs more and more and more, and he's not a satisfied person. And I think that's instructive to us. Yes. Yes, Bill.
Isn't that part of the fallacy of the interpretation of what the American dream is?
Yeah.
I mean, for some people, the American dream is more, 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 more.
Right, right.
For some people who came to America originally, the American dream was to be able to worship God in the way that they felt God deserved to be worshipped and they wanted to worship.
Sure. Certainly there was a segment that came over for very pure wanting to honor God things, but as you're saying, this idea of the American dream that's out there, which is about me by my own bootstraps, making it big and getting all this stuff. Think about our most wealthy and powerful and popular people. And think about how many wrecked marriages, how many disowned children, how many neglected whatevers that are just train wrecks. And that's just not true in American history, it's true in world history. Xerxes is not a happy man. He's got everything you could want, but he is not a happy man. And that's...
He wanted Greece and he couldn't get it.
Yeah, he wanted Greece and he couldn't get it. So now, he's feeling down. It's not easy being green, said Kermit the Frog. And so he's feeling down. And so his advisors say, here's this idea. And it's a tragic example of money, power, sex, whatever doesn't buy happiness. And here he is in this situation. So
The excesses seem like it's almost an addiction.
Yes.
It would be an addicted behavior.
Yes. He's addicted to his own pleasure. King Xerxes is addicted to his own pleasure. And at that moment, we're like, oh my goodness, we are addicted to our own pleasure. We really are, collectively. Maybe you're not, but collectively as a culture, we are addicted to our own pleasure. So, and if you don't please me, I hate you, right? I mean, that's the corollary to that. So we love those who please us and hate those who displease us, and that's kind of where we are. So don't be like King Xerxes. And Lord have mercy on all the Esthers and all the people and all the concubines in the histories of the world, and the eunuchs for that matter, who get hauled off against their will and their lives are wrecked so they can serve some king who's obsessed with his own way. Let's pray and then we'll dismiss for today. Lord, thank you for this good conversation today. Thank you for this story. And I pray you'd help us to search our hearts. I pray that we would not be like Xerxes, and you would help us to deliberately, intentionally take some actions to combat that constant greed that we have, that constant craving for more and more, that the flesh would not win, but that the Spirit would win in us to your glory. Help us to look more like you. We pray your mercy, Lord, on all the people around the world, like these women in this passage who've been trafficked against their will, who are being trafficked against their will for the purpose of somebody else's pleasure or power. And we pray, come, Lord Jesus, and bring an end to that, and help us to be instruments of your mercy and your justice and your peace. Help us to reflect your character today in our interactions, that we will be your witnesses faithfully. And I pray your blessing that you'd gather us again next week safely here to study more for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, I'm going to say goodbye to the internet, and we will see you all again next Wednesday.